Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are on planet Earth. I'm Renzo Guinto, the Chief Planetary Doctor of PH Lab based here in the Philippines. I'm also the inaugural director of the new Planetary and Global Health Program of the St. Luke's College of Medicine. And here with me are my dear friends and mentors and colleagues. I would say we are the Planetary Health Triumvirate. That has been working together and discussing, debating for several, not just months, but almost a year now. And I am accompanied today, as I've mentioned, by Dr. Jemilah Mahmood. She's the special advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia on Public Health. She also used to be the Undersecretary General for Partnerships at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, or IFRC. She's joining us from Malaysia. And of course, a few hours behind us is Maria Guevara. She is the Senior Advisor on Global Health and the incoming International Medical Secretary of Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF. Good evening to you, Jemilah. Good afternoon. Good morning to you, Maria. Great to have you in this conversation.
Hi, Renzo and Maria.
Hi, both. So honored to be here with you guys.
Awesome. And, just to let the listeners, be aware about the dialogue. So this is part of the Action for Reset dialogues. Well, in fact, we are a trialogue now because we're 3 people. And this is part of a series under the Building the Reset campaign of the Health Systems Governance Collaborative, headquartered in the WHO, but also with so many other partners. And so for the past several months, they've organized a couple of webinars on many different issues, but all around this idea of building the reset for health, for global health, especially in the age of COVID. And so now, why don't we just jump in and jump straight away to our main topic, which is planetary health. Jemilah, we were actually in that planetary health focused webinar under this series a couple of months ago. We talk a lot about the problems in planetary health, and maybe you can just set the scene or set the stage. Where are we now when it comes to planetary health in the age of COVID? Are people actually getting it or embracing it? What's the situation now?
Thank you, Renzo. I think COVID-19 has been a tremendous opportunity and springboard for us to start, really pushing the envelope on planetary health. Now, mind you, planetary health itself in the concept is fairly. It's not a new concept, but the connotation of planetary health is fairly new. So people will look at planetary health from different angles, that you can look at it from an environmental angle, from a climate angle, from a health angle, and also from an economic angle. Now, as far as the world is concerned, we've seen, for example, the emissions dropping because of COVID-19 and less cars on the road and so on and so forth. And the public is generally very positive towards this, that, change is possible. Can we actually slow down climate change and so forth? So in terms of moving forward, we've really got to capitalize on this opportunity. From the Malaysian perspective, I would say that planetary health is fairly new to many people. So there's few of us, as usual, making a lot of noise and doing a lot of advocacy. But I'm very pleased to say that the Ministry of Environment is now working on the cabinet paper for planetary health, which means that it really wants to take this very seriously and wants to call for a multidisciplinary, interministerial position and policies to be developed on planetary health.
That's good news, Jemilah, that the ministry itself has already embraced planetary health. And we can only wish that every ministry, and not just the environment ministry or the health ministry, yes, but every ministry really embraces, the ethos and the spirit of planetary health. Is it the same case in Geneva,
Uh,
Maria? You're the one in the global governance arena.
ooh.
You're at the heart. You're at the global health capital, as we always describe Geneva. Are we seeing the same reception towards planetary health?
Well, I'm not sure in the terminology that we call it as planetary health, but for sure the climate change and environmental degradation and all those issues that are linked in that way of looking at it, yes, I think there is obviously a pickup on that. In the planetary health framing, at least in where I work as a humanitarian in the humanitarian sector, even that's also a struggle. But fortunately for some organization, and even within MSF or Médecins Sans Frontières, it's been a struggle sort of to say that to bring the topic on the table, but we've certainly put it on the table. So now we are using, at least in the Switzerland section, the term planetary health, because we see it as a very encompassing framing. So where you look at all kinds of issues like climate change, but as well the insecurities like food and water, pollution situations, biodiversity loss, and all that. And in a time where, well, as we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic caused by zoonosis, it makes sense to sort of look at the health impacts, at least the humanitarian crisis, health and humanitarian crisis, in that kind of framing. It's still a work in progress. There's a lot of studies and linkages we have to make, as much as the adaptation and mitigation steps we have to take.
So at least some there's some movement. There's growing awareness, and if you just look at social media, a lot of our young people are actually energized by this concept of planetary health. I really like what Jemilah mentioned about the imagination. COVID somehow serve as a window to what could be. Less cars on the street. Have also shown that these are just really temporary, and so the challenge is how can we make, let's say, decarbonization and environmental improvements be long lasting, but not in the form of lockdowns and a pandemic. And so I guess the question now, because the question that was imposed to us is the reaction for reset. What are the tangible actions that we can do? What are some of the action ideas that you have in mind and that we should be pursuing?
Well, I think that for our region, and I think certainly for Malaysia, a greater amount of education is required, right? You've really got to invest in, not just advocacy, but really getting down to the basics of why it makes sense in terms of, whether it's health or economy. The second thing is, I think we are cognizant of the fact that irrespective whether the vaccine is available or not in the short term, that, life has changed after COVID. So there'll be much more, at least here in Malaysia, an openness to working from home, for example. And that's actually going to help us with a bit of the decarbonization. The extent of it, we're not clear, we're not sure, but possibly, in a very positive way. The third thing, I think it's about, our shift towards our attitudes in the oil and gas industry, for example. Malaysia's oil and gas giant Petronas has actually made a commitment to being carbon or zero carbon emission by 2050, which is a big step forward. Other corporations are looking into how they go into much more green technology, even financing itself, right? That banks are now saying, our central bank is saying that we need to have policies where borrowers and corporations need to demonstrate that they are adhering to ESG principles, which basically is in line with planetary health.
That's great.
And Maria?
Yeah, so no question, education is a key. I mean, I think it's a lot of the tasks we're having inside is also educating ourselves as humanitarian actors. On that note, though, because we are humanitarian actors, we're quite very much reactive and responsive. So a lot of it is very action oriented already. And the way we're framing it is through the different pillars of being operational, adapting our operations in a more effective and efficient response. But we're also looking at it from the footprint pillar, where what kind of actions can we take to mitigate it, whether that's, transitioning to renewable energy, managing our waste, for example, it doesn't leave more harm than good. That we are looking at decarbonization, at least looking at our transportation and supply. But also the third pillar is then, how we're amplifying the voice of the populations that we are trying to reach and highlighting the plight they're seeing in this planetary health or in climate change times, as much as COVID times. And some of those things are taking into shape. For example, like some of the questionings we're having is one's, and the beautiful thing that if we ever have a vaccine, but it will change the way we practice, right? There will be more PPEs, there will be more materials. How do you reach people? So there's the safety and security, but there's also the management of that waste, right? How do we make less negative environmental impact? The volume of waste that's going to happen, we have to really look at that more responsibly. But before that, in the response to COVID, for example, we've had to, adjust to the capacity to surge from the international perspective versus the local and national perspective, as much as with human resource, but as well as the supply resource. So we've had to adapt our programs accordingly, do a lot of support through virtual, which has been working. So using a lot telehealth, telemarketing, bringing care at the hands of the patients by helping them, reach us through phones, doing consultations that way. So there's a lot of adaptations that we've done operationally because of COVID that hopefully we can then learn from as we address the more compounding issues of planetary health concerns.
So thanks, Maria, for reminding us about, and also Jemilah, you mentioned about the vaccine. Maria, you mentioned about how to embed sustainability into our COVID response operations, but also the recovery path. And initially, when we were starting with this pandemic, I saw national health systems in panic mode, right? And oftentimes, or most of the time, environmental considerations take a backseat. But in January, it will be first year since this pandemic was declared a public health emergency of international concern, and now we can't use COVID as an excuse to put the environment on the side. Now we have to be much more intentional in, for instance, making sure PPEs. Maybe we've really generated a lot of PPE waste, but once the vaccine is available, that will lead to a surge of used syringes and all these types of packaging. And so how are we as a global health sector preparing for that to make sure we do not create a new crisis while we're trying to solve one, right? And so it's important to be reminded. Jemilah, you mentioned about the initiatives from the private sector in Malaysia, but I'm sure in many parts of the world. We're already seeing some big corporations making such bold commitments, even hospitals making net zero commitments as well. But I'm also quite afraid that what we might be seeing is a bit of greenwashing and there's a bit of superficiality here. How can we make sure that, again, these are not just for show and really, where is the difficult conversation around, transforming the economy and creating an economy that is compatible with planetary health?
I think that's a really important point because while corporations can say all these wonderful things, we need to have serious policies, right, that drive change, the incentives and the disincentives. As I mentioned before, the budget of our country is being debated now in Parliament, but already starting to build in language such as sustainable financing and so on and so forth. This is where I'm saying that the central bank policies on borrowing is going to be very critical. The stock exchange now and the Securities Commission in Malaysia having indicators for, ESG, basically environment, society and good governance. So I think these are all important, but it also requires an all of society approach. And I truly believe that if you get to education first, and this is going to be generational change, right? It's not going to happen overnight. We have to invest in education from a very young age. We have to invest in the ideas around whether it's the donut economics or the circular economy. That's no longer a mad rush to increase your GDP, but really to feel how can you grow in a sustainable way. It's also about activism. It's about getting civil society and society writ large to demand from government and corporate sector, and that's where young people will play an extremely important role. But not just young people. I think you've got to have an intergenerational approach to this as well. People who are like me, who are older, must be able to convey that, gosh, if there's one thing I really regret is that we weren't tough enough on looking at, climate change or planetary health or whatever. So I think, it has got to be many approaches, multi-sectoral in its approach, but also, painting I think what's very important is the dialogue around health and climate and everything now is so doomsday, right? But we've got to try and also paint a picture of what's actually possible, a much more optimistic outlook into look at what we have managed to achieve in 1 year. And we thought it's impossible, but it is possible, although we didn't ask for it. But imagine if we extended what we did now, some of the good practices, then we can at least delay, the thresholds that we are trying to avoid.
And you mentioned the donut economy. I just would like to make a shout out to our friend and colleague Kate Rayworth, the originator of this concept. And I always say that book, Doughnut Economics, should be required reading for every person, for every human being in the era of the Anthropocene.
Yep.
So, Maria, any thoughts regarding the new economy post-COVID?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the medical humanitarian world, we always say we're not economists or politicians or any of that sort, but we are affected by it regardless. But I mean, I just wanted to highlight, completely support that, in the field of health, obviously it's about well-being. And what's great about the Doughnut economics is that it frames it around that sweet spot of well-being. So of course, that makes sense. And part of the reason why planetary health makes sense is also about understanding those planetary boundaries, right? And where the social inequities expand to, and where does the planetary boundaries limit us? So I think those are great framing. I just wanted to expand a little bit on, not only is it intergenerational, but it's also interdisciplinary. And I think this is what's great about the overarching frame of planetary health. It really pushes the alliances, the importance of partnership and working together with different disciplines, because we cannot do it alone. We have to do this together in solidarity. And so when we're trying to reset global health and the times today, I mean, we have to look at our collective security depends on our solidarity work, and how, to do that as one, and not leaving anyone behind, but actually including everybody in the discussion. At least from the humanitarian perspective, that makes sense, considering we are already maximizing, meeting our limitations in responding to all these cascading crises ahead of us. The Lancet Countdown is just launched this past week and through this week. And we wrote a brief in it as MSF, and highlighting, what we're facing as medical humanitarian crisis today across the movement and across the humanitarian sector. but the world, and that we can't, our limitations are already at maximum. We do need everybody to be working together on this.
And you mentioned the Lancet countdown. It actually came up in my mind a while ago. And when Jemilah was saying, we should also tell the story of success, of triumph, the baby steps that we're undertaking. Every time I read the Lancet countdown towards the end of each year, it makes me feel a bit more depressed than the year before because it tells me like, hey, these are really the bad stuff going to happen to our global population health because of unaverted climate crisis. But I
Right.
think now is the time to also tell, the story of how hospitals are starting to change their practices, how communities are going more local, to produce their own food, and not just nutritious food, but also sustainably produced food as well. And so many of these stories. You mentioned, Maria, about the importance of solidarity. And I think,
Yeah.
if there's one pandemic that we want, that is the pandemic of planetary health. How can we create that positive pandemic of
Yeah.
planetary health, build that global solidarity, and really reorient the way we do things. Maria, go ahead.
Well, from our side, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do, at least within MSF, is to mainstream it, right? Make it like a regular language, in the same way that we would do any context analysis, in the same way we would do an exploratory mission in a new crisis situation. It's about mainstreaming that thinking as much as the action itself, is the idea, and knowing that this is something we need to consider. But that takes a lot of education, and I'm actually going to throw this back at you, because I know that you at PH Lab has been doing a lot of work on how do you bring the language and the narrative into a mainstream kind of impact. And I know that you have some tools and tricks up your sleeves that you could share. Maybe you can enlighten me again, because I actually need your insights on this. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Maria. So since the pandemic began, I've been advocating for planetary health, especially here in the Philippines, but also worldwide. I've addressed financial executives, and I was amazed. The week after the event, they came up with an op-ed in one of the country's national newspaper. We finance execs are supporting the goal of planetary health. So I think those are really important first steps, similar to what Jemilah mentioned, ministries expressing, their interest and commitment. We've also been trying to, Philippinize. I'm from the Philippines, and we've been trying to Philippinize the concept. Again, speaking to Jemilah's comment a while ago, it sounds old, but it also sounds new. And so we really need to bring planetary health messages to the grassroots, something that is, very understandable, something that is also actionable. So there, and there's so many efforts. It's not just me, I'm just so amazed and inspired by fellow planetary health stewards, as I would call them, scattered around the world, emerging scholars and practitioners, a lot of them millennials who are, one, dissatisfied with the status quo, but number two, so energized, full of hope, that, we can still fix this, crisis that we're in. But it takes, not just a village, but
The
a
whole
global,
planet.
a whole planet to really affect this transformation. Jemilah, what else can we do really, specifically in our region,
Yeah.
Asia Pacific?
I mean, we've discussed this, right? I think what we need to do is, I think our collective dream is to set up, an Asia Pacific Planetary Health Center, a convener. It is not about the infrastructure of a center like this, but it's about bringing the energy, the intellect, the passion, and the sense of possibility that is actually, which I think is really achievable, because you have already described, Renzo, what is happening in the Philippines. Maria is influencing, through the health NGOs, what might be possible. I'm trying my best to get policies to change in the country. But I think if all of us came together in this region, which is the most disaster-prone region in the world, it just makes so much sense to have that convening power, the power of possibility, right? And inspiring regional organizations, governments, civil society, people, businesses, to say this is possible. Let's do much more together. Let's connect the dots. Let's collaborate. Let's share best practices. Let's take this to scale. Why isn't it that we're not putting pressure on donors and governments to buy biodegradable gloves in the time of pandemic? It's available. It just costs more. Why should manufacturers even make non-biodegradable anymore? So I think, let's work hard towards this. I think, if we get a group of like-minded people, as Margaret Mead says, never underestimate what they can achieve.
Yeah. So village, the whole planet, a group of like-minded people, infected by a new pandemic, with a new pandemic of planetary health. So yeah, well, thank you, Jemilah, Maria, for joining me in this conversation. I'm sure after this, we'll continue this offline. But I hope that our listeners were, stimulated, were inspired to think about these issues, but more importantly, to act now. To act now, not tomorrow, for our generation, but also for the generations that are yet to come. This other new book, The Good Ancestor, talks about, by Roman Krznaric, this is the time for us to really think about becoming good ancestors. We want the generation of 2120, that is 100 years from now, to read the history books, look back to the past, and say that the COVID 2020 generation will have become good ancestors to them. So again, thank you, Jemilah. Thank you, Maria. And
Thank you.
let's all stay safe.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.